Good morning, good afternoon, kia ora, vanakkam, ni hao. This is Prashant Khanna chiming in again on a session on privacy and its imperatives for an organization. Today, we shall look at the concept of privacy and its implementation in organizations from a technical perspective. The topics we shall cover today are personally identifiable information, where we shall have a relook at the concept of what personally identifiable information is and how we need to deal with it in a technical manner. We then look at reducing privacy complexity, where we'll have a brief look at how to address the complexity of implementing privacy controls within organizations can be handled. We shall then focus on what protected health information or PHI means. We shall dig a little deeper into what is PHI and why is it critical to maintain certain controls in organizations that deal with health information about you and me. We shall then have a deeper dive into the HIPAA, or the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, and what are the technical guidelines and controls organizations need to put in place to align with the HIPAA. Finally, we'll have a quick look at what the new NZ Privacy Act actually entails and how it is going to change the landscape in New Zealand. What is personally identifiable information, or PII? Information that is linked or linkable to an individual, such as medical, educational, financial, and employment information, can be treated as PII. Some of the major tenets are mentioned on the slide here. However, personal characteristics including photographic images, especially of the face, or other identifiable characteristics such as fingerprints, handwriting, or other biometric data such as retina scan, voice signature, and facial geometry are also elements of PII. It is important to note that the concept of PII exists in multiple countries and across multiple industries, with some legal and regulatory variations. The term PII, or personally identifiable information, is generally used within the United States, while personal data is the term used to refer to information that identifies or is about an identifiable individual in the European Union, Canada, and Japan. In the United States, information about an individual's health is defined as protected health information, or PHI. While in the European Union, the same information is considered sensitive personal information, which is legally significant subset of personal information. Ultimately, PII is a legal concept rather than a technical term. When dealing with PII, an organization should seek the appropriate guidance to determine which law and regulation apply to the personal data being collected, stored, and processed by the organization. There are literally hundreds of states and territorial privacy and data security laws in the United States itself. California alone has more than 25. Add to this the industrial frameworks and self-regulation guidelines, such as the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, or the PCI DSS, and the compliance and scope for most organizations can suddenly become very, very complex. There are certain identifiable ways to reduce the complexity of implementing privacy in organizations. Now, I have defined 5 simple ways here. One way to reduce the complexity and the cost associated with compliance is to identify the most common compliance requirements across the organization's data security and privacy obligations. We need then to prioritize the implementation of solutions that address these baseline requirements. Now, defining and adhering to a documented security control baseline helps ensure an organization to properly protecting its PII. This baseline should also include incident and breach reporting requirements specific to personally identifiable information exposure. When an organization interacts with customers, it almost invariably collects personal information about them. In response to an escalating number of security breaches that results in public disclosures of personal information, a good standard that you can refer to would be the NIST 800-122 uh, Guide to Protecting the Confidentiality and Personally Identifiable Information document, which was released in 2010 and has been amended since. It is important to keep in mind that by organizations that laws are not static. They change with time and also the prevailing technological as well as the cultural landscape. Baselining data protection obligation should be thus an iterative, risk-based activity. The internal assessment of the personal data an organization collects should include whether there is an actual need for that sensitive data or otherwise. You don't need to protect data you don't collect or worry about complying with the associated laws and regulations. Unfortunately, PII has eclipsed other datasets such as credit card payment information as the most valuable data to steal. Using stolen PII, a cybercriminal can build a complete virtual identity. Personally identifiable information datasets such as social security number, date of birth, employment history, all put together, are used to create fake personas with which a fraudster can buy goods and services, open lines of credit, change bank account access, and perform a plethora of other illegal activities. The Ponemon Institute, which is an independent research organization, values the cost of each exposed PII record at about 178 US dollars. With the average breach exposing 30,000 records, the financial risk quickly adds up. Moreover, the cost of a breach as calculated by the Ponemon Institute does not include catastrophic breaches of over 100,000 records, which we have seen in recent times. In addition, the financial repercussions, customer trust, corporate branding, and future business can quickly dissipate after a PIA exposure. Coming to a definition of what protected health information or PHI means. Now, in the United States, the HIPAA or the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act privacy rules protect most protected health information. PHI is information that relates to an individual's past, present, or future physical and or mental health. The provision of health care for individuals. It also contains payment for provision of health care that can be used to identify the individuals. Certain common identifiers such as date of birth, social security number, and demographic information when it can be associated with the individual's health information. You need to note that information such as an individual's name, date of birth, and social security number, while considered personal data or PII, may not necessarily be PHI in the absence of health data. One of the important concepts of dealing with health information in a technical manner is what is called as de-identification of PHI. Under HIPAA, the standard for de-identification of PHI is defined under section 164.514A of the privacy rules as mentioned on the slide. It states, health information that does not identify an individual and with respect to which there is no reasonable basis to believe that the information can be used to identify an individual is not individually identifiable health information. Now it's kind of a tongue twister, but it does cover the essence of what it actually says. In simple terms, de-identification of PHI is the process of removing an individual's personal identifiers from health information. There are two reasons an organization might want to de-identify the PHI it holds. The first is to mitigate the privacy risk to individual data subjects and corresponding risk to the organization in the event of a data breach. And second, support secondary use of data such as medical research. De-identified data can be legally used in doing collective and collative medical research in several organizations. Now, as a privacy rule, HIPAA implements privacy and de-identification measures for control in an organization in two ways. The first being expert determination and the second being safe harbor. Under the expert determination method, a covered entity is permitted to determine the health information is not individually identifiable health information only if a person with appropriate knowledge of and experience with generally accepted statistical and scientific principles and methods for rendering information not individually identifiable applies those principles and methods to determine that the information cannot be used, either alone or in combination with other available data, to re-identify the subject of the information. In addition, the method and result of the analysis that results in such a determination must be documented. Now, it effectively means that you should have a team looking at your data in a manner that it cannot be associated with a specific person. Safe harbor method for de-identification uh, identifies 18 identifiers of the individual and of the individual's employers, relatives, or other household members which must be removed. Under the safe harbor identifiers, the 18 specific identifiers are mentioned here. Names, all geographic subdivisions smaller than the state level, individual street addresses, city, council, and the zip code. All dates that relate to individuals such as date of birth, uh, date of discharge, etc., with the exception of the year in which those events occurred. If the individual was aged 90 or older at the time of the event, the year must also be removed or aggregated into a category of age 90 or older. Telephone numbers, fax numbers, email addresses, social security numbers, medical record numbers, health plan beneficiary numbers, account numbers, certificate and license numbers, vehicle identifiers and serial numbers including license plate numbers, device identifiers and associated serial numbers, web URLs of specific domains where the subject or the relatives and others related to the subject have visited, IP addresses, biometric identifiers, full face photographs, and any other similar images, any other uniquely identifiable code number or characteristics except those that are mentioned in the HIPAA rules. In addition to removing the 18 identifiers listed above, the covered entity cannot have actual knowledge that the information could be used alone or in conjunction with other information to identify an individual who is subject of the information. Now, these are fairly stringent requirements to be dealt with any organization. Thus, it is a fairly complex process for any organization to comply with HIPAA uh, and take necessary measures to protect themselves from risk of an exposure. Now, while handling these risks from a technical perspective, some of the guidelines that are normally put in place by mature organizations are: 1. Encryption at rest. This means to protect the data at rest or on a hardware from being read anywhere. It protects the data from accidental breach. Encryption in transit. This prevents data sent on the internet from being read while going from one place to the other. Data backups. Provide a copy of the PHI that can be restored when required by the data subjects and the data processors. Audit logging or log backup. This involves providing a copy of all audit records from the operating system and infrastructure to ensure that proper logging and monitoring can be performed when needed. Intrusion detection and prevention involves putting in place an agent that monitors the server for potential intrusions, while network restrictions enables controlling certain aspects of the network so that sensitive data is not open to the world or sent on unsecured environments. Vulnerability scanning is an accepted method which is used in most organizations to continuously scan all servers and containers to identify any running software with known vulnerabilities. Identity and access management restrictions are recommended to be put into place to limit permissions in the cloud for people who are handling the data. It even protects experienced users from creating environments that can perhaps store PHI when they are not supposed to. Hardening of operating systems and adhering to stipulated benchmark is a must do for such organizations. Of course, patching would entail applying all security patches to all servers and end devices, even when you're using mobile devices. From an implementation point of view, how does HIPAA look for maybe a doctor who is implementing a simple WordPress website? Well, the technologies employed in a typical HIPAA compliant WordPress setup for a small healthcare provider or business associates might include the items listed on the slide. Please note that this is just a template I've created and this will evolve with technology. Now the template could look like a Linux-based cloud server with WordPress pre-installed, server management with auto patching enabled so that any change in any of the patch information is done automatically. You have a managed firewall protecting the critical elements of the website. You could have a firewall appliance and a VPN user for each applicable employer to manage the backend if needed. Managed intrusion prevention system with live reporting and a clearly identifiable escalation matrix. A separate, secure, and highly available backup for at least 30 days retention on a stable server. The server should ideally be multi-tenancy. Have a managed intrusion prevention system with live reporting, a separate secure and highly available backup server with at least 30 days retention is definitely recommended. 10 terabytes of monthly data transfer to handle all data loads. Managed network security solution, maybe managed system security solution as well. So please remember that this is just a template that I'm mentioning here based on some of the best practices that are recommended in HIPAA in the NIST 800-122. The one that was created in 2016 was a far cry from what I have mentioned here now. Having seen the typical WordPress template, it's also important that to note that hardening systems is critically important for HIPAA compliance. Now, the server that supports the WordPress environment must be optimized for security. Whether you're working on a Windows or a Linux, you would want to follow the best practices such as updating to a supported operating system, keeping problematic devices off the network. Maybe you could even resort to air gapping or otherwise controlling access of people and processes to your system. Keeping problematic devices is of course one of the things, but also ensuring that configuring and patching your server databases is very, very important. We need to have a continuous scanning for open files and network shares. They are often the route for hackers or even inadvertent changes to your system by people who are not very well conversed with them. Disabling non-critical system services, configuring host-based firewalls and devices, separating disk partitions of critical information and non-critical information, and finally managing file integrity. Now together, the template that I gave in the past and hardening of OS and software is a good start point for ensuring compliance to PHI based systems. Uh, this is not something that is static. It will change with time, and anyone who's dealing with this information would need to keep updating as time goes by. Now, having seen what HIPAA does, let's now jump on and see what is the new Privacy Act for New Zealand. A word about the new NZ Privacy Act. The NZ Privacy Act will be in effect on the 1st of December 2020 and is a landmark change to the old Act of 1993. The stated aim of the Act is to promote people's confidence that their personal information is secure and will be treated properly. So what are the key changes to the Act now, which are envisaged from the one that was there in 1993 and has been changed since? For businesses, the first notable change is new mandatory privacy breach notification requirement. According to the new rules, if organizations have a privacy breach that poses a risk of serious harm, they are required to notify the commissioner and affected parties. Going forward, not notifying the commissioner in the event of a breach will be considered an offense. Under the Act, it is an offense to fail to inform the Privacy Commissioner when there has been a notifiable privacy breach. The Act clarifies that liability for breach notification sits with the business or organization and not the individual employees. This move pulls New Zealand into line with the European Union standards and GDPR data breach notification requirements, as well as the Australian Privacy Act. There are also strict new rules regarding the movement of data offshore. Under the new rules, agencies are only able to disclose personal information to an overseas person if the data owner authorized the disclosure, the overseas person was in a prescribed country, or the agency believed on reasonable grounds that the overseas person was required to protect the information in a way that overall provides comparable safeguards to those in the privacy bill. Simply put, if an agency outside of New Zealand is receiving Kiwi users' data, they are subject to similar requirements as that in the new Privacy Act. If a jurisdiction does not offer similar protection, the individual concerned must be fully informed of that fact and made aware that their information may not be adequately protected with disclosure expressly authorized. Similarly, foreign presence will have to comply with New Zealand laws if they are doing businesses here. If an international digital platform is carrying on business in New Zealand with the New Zealanders' personal information, there will be no question that they will be obliged to comply with New Zealand laws, regardless of whether they are here or where their servers are based. The bill creates new criminal offenses as well, including misleading an agency to obtain access to someone else's personal information, as well as destroying a document containing personal information, knowing that a request has been made for it. Under the old Act, penalties for offenses are fines up to $2,000. Under the new Act, fines for offenses can reach up to $10,000. The Privacy Commissioner has in the past called for fine for as high as $1 million. To enforce it all, the Privacy Commissioner's powers have been beefed up, with the Commissioner now able to issue notices ordering agencies to comply with the Privacy Act. If an organization refuses to make personal information available upon request, the Commissioner will have the power to demand its release. Now, in the last 2 weeks, we've seen that privacy is challenging because not only is it an all-encompassing concept that helps to safeguard important value such as human autonomy and dignity, but also the means for achieving it can vary. For example, privacy can be achieved through seclusion, limiting observations, or individuals' control of facets of their identities, for example, body data, reputation, etc. Moreover, human autonomy and dignity are not fixed, quantifiable constructs. They are filtered through cultural diversity and individual differences. This broad and shifting nature of privacy makes it difficult to communicate clearly about privacy risk within and between organizations and with individuals. What has been missing is a common language and practical tools that is flexible enough to address diverse privacy needs. When you go into the industry, you will be questioned and you will also ponder over this particular statement a number of times. It will be upon your ingenuity as to how you would be implementing solutions that keep the PII and the PHI secure, safe, and yet handy. Thank you. I Thank you so much.